everybody. Welcome in, welcome in, welcome in. It's very nice to see you all. Welcome into Conversations with Authors. Today we bring to you Tareq Azim, the author of Empower. But before we get to our authors properly, allow me to welcome you to Book Passage's Conversations with Authors. If you've seen one of these events before, well then, welcome back. We're glad to see you again. And if you're new here, then Book Passage is a group of independently run bookstores out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and we host and run book talks just like these very often throughout the week, both in person in our Ferry Building, our San Francisco Ferry Building and Corte Madera locations, and right here online. As we are streaming on YouTube, and will continue to do so in the future, please consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button just below the video. It's completely free to you, and it really helps us out. And as an added bonus, if you click the little bell next to the subscribe button, you'll be alerted every time we go live, so you don't have to miss out on something that you otherwise might have really enjoyed. If you'd like to check out our upcoming events, or just anything like the idea of an email newsletter more, you can find both of those at bookpassage.com. If you'd like to check out our speaker's book, which again is called Empower, you can find it using the first link in the description just below this video. Finally, and this one's very important, if you have any questions for us tonight, please take the time to write them in the YouTube chat. It's the only way to get your questions to the speakers today, so be sure to not miss your chance. Now allow me to introduce Tareq Azim, who is determined to normalize conversations about mental health. This mission drives his success as a seven-time world championship attending coach in combat sports, a former Division I linebacker at Fresno State, a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, an author, and a philanthropist. He lives in San Francisco, where I've just heard he comes to us today from. Seth Davis, who is our in-conversation partner today, is a studio analyst for college basketball at CBS Sports and a senior writer at The Athletic, an excellent print if you are looking for a good one. He is the New York Times bestselling author of Wooden, A Coach's Life, and When March Went Mad, the game that transformed basketball. I'm quite excited for this event tonight. I'm really excited to introduce you all to our speakers today. So allow me to hand it over to the both of you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Nick, and Tareq. Good to see you, my brother up the coast. I'm down in LA, and Tareq and I were put together by the folks at Simon & Schuster and our mutual literary agent David Black. And it was trying to think exactly, Tareq, what month and year it was. I know it was April. I was coming off a Final Four, so I guess it would have been 2019 is what I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Is that about right?
Took us a good 19 months together on this project.
Yeah. So Tareq was in LA, and I said, well, we kind of got put together. Let's meet for lunch. So we met at this place in LA, and I'm sitting there, I'm drinking water, and the waitress comes over, and I order food, and I look at Tareq, and he's not drinking any water. He doesn't want any lunch. And I said, how come? And he said, well, it's Ramadan. I'm fasting. I said, well, why don't we meet for lunch? I don't want to have to sit here and have you not eat. And he said, no, it's awesome. It's fine. So I ate well, and Tareq didn't drink, but that should be for everybody here. Just the first glimpse. And really all you need to know about Tareq is that he's at his happiest when other people are eating. And that's really how he's gone about his life and his work. And when you hear his life story and the story of his family, I think that that resonates a lot more, because on the one hand, he didn't come from much, but on the other hand, he had everything. And the success that he's had in his life and in his work and in his mission to address mental health issues with athletes, with veterans, with everybody, is really extraordinary. And so the book is Empower, Conquering the Disease of Fear. And I'm really proud of you, Tareq, because you put everything that you had, like everything that you do, you put into this book. We had some painful, emotional conversations as we wrote it together. And as I always said to you, when you're feeling those emotions, that means we must be writing something important. And so I hope that's how everybody feels. Tareq, we're going to get into your life story, but I want you to first address the subtitle that we came up with, that you came up with really, and that is Conquering the Disease of Fear, because the point here is that we're not conquering fear, we're conquering the disease of fear. What's the difference?
Well, look, I think it becomes a disease when we allow it to lead to diseases, right? Or we allow it to stimulate in harm already existing diseases like addiction, depression, mental health, emotional health. tendencies around, my first answer when something isn't going my way is to quit and end my life. I think that's a disease. And I think fear, obviously, if you give it permission to, stimulates that, right? It gives you that excuse on why you allow this to actually act as a disease. So, conquering the disease has one very simple solution. And it's understanding that we have the freedom and the permission to choose the narrative of how we want to define what fear means. And I think, obviously with the intention of our book and my life story and these experiences, the intention is to be able to give all the readers that, the ability to recognize that conquering this actually means take control of the narrative of what it means, which will allow you to then embrace it, right? So I believe conquering the disease of fear is the simple solution of embracing it.
Very much so. Well, it's a complicated question and a very long answer, but make it a digestible answer for us. Tell us how you grew up and the story of your family and your early years growing up in San Francisco. Tell us where you came from and who you are.
Yeah, look, my family and I, came to the United States as refugees from Afghanistan. Family left Afghanistan in '79 to Germany to a refugee program there, where I was born in Munich. From Munich, we waited a good, 2.5, 3 years to go through this whole immigration process of really trying to get into the U.S., where the other half of our family was. Half the family went to New York, the other half came to San Francisco, and fortunately, we came to the San Francisco half of the family. Came here very young, almost 2 years old, and spent the majority of my life not really knowing this was home, because the talk at home was always, like, let's just not get involved in too much. Let's not have too much, because we're going to go back to Afghanistan any minute now. And the war is going to end. We're going to go back, and it's going to go right back to who we were and what we were and where we came from. Like, let's just go ahead and embrace what we currently have. But it's totally opposite of who we are and where we come from and so on. And, growing up, it was that was one battle of just really not knowing, like, if this is home. And number two, there was this massive distance between the reality we were living and who we were and who our family was, right? Knowing who my grandfathers were, right? Both grandfathers came in from, very, very historic backgrounds, both living in world history books today. Two grandfathers that had very, very, not normal concepts and ideas of how they wanted to live life, and the significance of actually maximizing and optimizing on self capabilities. And, I was always raised in a home where, knowing our family background, our family history, our family associations with what we did with, the peace and prosperity of that country and the monarchy and all of this. And then you're living in the projects in Section 8 housing in Concord. And you're just like, okay, so I don't get it. So inside this house, we're like this really dominant, well-known, respected family of intellects and capable game changers. Then you walk outside and you're sitting here walking around with your head down at a grocery store because you don't want to get seen by your classmates that your parents are paying with food stamps. So there was there was a lot of confusion, but I never dealt with it. Like, I never just sat in the confusion. I was always like, mouthpiece in, go forward, mouthpiece in, go forward. You'll deal with it one day. And I never really dealt with any of that ever, because I never knew any different, right? Like, nowadays, when you sit back and you look at it, a lot of folks are always like, oh God, you grew up with so much trauma. And the trauma a lot of folks are primarily, referring to is the health of my parents. So much of our youth was consumed with, psych wards and insane asylums and our summer breaks were in hospitals and doctors' offices. And, our parents were struggling. My father was struggling quite a bit from depression and bipolarism, and, later on with some schizophrenic episodes. And my mother struggling tremendously from PTSD, from how they had to exit the country, to, being a princess and 24 hours later, a peasant, not knowing the language with two kids and stuck in a country of nothing to do and don't know what to do with. So it was, there was a lot of that, and we had to grow up really, really young. And again, there was no time to sit and like talk this out and try to understand it. It was just move forward. My siblings and I, my younger brother Joseph and older sister Dina, we had to grow up. real fast, real young. And I think a lot of our community actually did, because all of our parents came from very similar backgrounds and fell into very similar situations as young parents. Um, so it was funny. It's funny nowadays, like, because again, a lot of folks are always referring to our life and our childhood as trauma. And to us, we're like, oh my God, we had the best childhood in the world you could ever imagine.
Your relationship with your father was incredibly important and formative, as it is for so many of us men, that the dad is our first male figure. And you write a lot in the book about how that dynamic kind of became reversed, that from an early stage, it was almost like you were the father and it was your job to take care of him as if he were your child. Why did you feel that way?
My father was very fragile, and he was very kind, and he was an individual that avoided every form of confrontation you can ever imagine. And he was very easy to take advantage of. And I would notice that and recognize that very young, especially when like family and friends would make jokes and he wouldn't defend himself. He wouldn't say things back. He'd be very quiet about it. And back then, I always thought he was just weak, and I thought he was just scared. And obviously, as time went on in life, I realized that my dad he was just above it all, right? And but why I got so protective and obsessive about my father was because of his innocence. Um, he was robbed of really developing quite a bit when he was a child, because he had so much, and he was a son of a very, very important person, and he was the only son of this person, of my grandfather. And my father was robbed of having to develop a ton of skills, and it's very similar to a lot of the work I've done later on in my adult life with some of these professional athletes that actually stopped developing after high school because they really didn't have to, right? Because they were so awesome and so freakish in athleticism. My father was the same, with his charm and his kindness. And my father was going through quite a bit prior to my birth, me obviously coming into this world. And one thing he'd say to me very, very, very young and on until the end of his life was, Dina and Yosef are my kids, but you're my best friend. And I'd asked him for the first time ever when I was 20 or so, we were in Afghanistan together. I said, why do you say that? And he said, I was in a very, very dark place and I didn't want to be alive anymore until you were born. But he never really had to tell me that when I was very young, because I just sensed that and knew it because of how he treated me and how he would feel when I was around. I think he almost felt protected. It's not that not that anyone would ever threaten him and have to beat people up as a child or anything, but I just think he felt, obviously, as my personality started to mature, my father was grooming me to be what he never could be, which was, he thought I was fearless. He thought I would attack and go after everything and anything I felt I wanted to pursue, competition, debate, academics, ventures. And there was a lot of things he wouldn't do all of it, but he'd do some of it. I think we had this really interesting connection that he was like, I'm going to make him do what I was always scared to do or told to be scared to do.
Right. And as we talk so much in the book, and you write in the book, you and your father loved each other very much, and that instilled in you a lot of purpose and strength. But that's a heck of a burden for a young kid to carry in a lot of ways. I don't say it's not healthy, but it creates a conflict that you just take on so much as a young kid. And I do think that you sort of took this into your athletic career and your professional career to the point where it's a lot. It's a lot to carry, and you've carried this your whole life. Tell me the role that sports played in your development as a child and giving you direction and giving you purpose and giving you an outlet for all these feelings that you were probably experiencing more than you could articulate at that age.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously at that age, it's very difficult to be able to articulate emotions and feelings and experiences. And ultimately, all I wanted in this world, and I still do, is I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to belong. And that's what sports did for me. That's what physical activity did for me, right? I think it was a key to freedom for me. It was my tool, my path, my highway, my Ferrari to freedom. And the freedom wasn't something like I was never restricted by my community. Like I never experienced discrimination or racism or any of that at all. Like complete opposite. there was so much love and support within our community. You know, like a lot of my friends and my chosen family growing up, they were all non-Afghans, right? It was all the white boys and the Polynesians and my African American friends and so on. So it wasn't that. The freedom was something, again, internal, right? It was something I felt restricted from. Like I just felt like, okay, like my parents don't think we're going to be here forever. They think we're going back. But look, I'm 16, 17, 15, 14, whatever it was in high school at that time. This is home. I'm American. I'm not going anywhere. So I need to start to acclimate and start to invest in living like an American would. And sports gave me that. And I had to pick the ultimate American sport of all, which was football. And I got into football my freshman year, you know, and I played varsity soccer as a freshman. So I had a leg on me. And I actually got into football by just wanting to be a kicker. Not like that's what I had to be. It's what I wanted to be because it was the safest for me, right? There was no fear of being judged or fear of getting, you know, flat backed or fear of not being able to be this athlete that I was with every other sport, but football I'd never played before. And so I just wanted to kick. And that kick actually gave me entry as being someone really good at something on the team. And I kind of stood out as a freshman kicker because I was always kicking out of the end zone, and it was like a big deal. And obviously the athleticism kind of exposed itself, and it created curiosity from my freshman coach named Mike Ivankovich, who was one of the most important figures, as you know, he's in the book, one of the most important figures of actually giving me a chance that I didn't know I had, by being like, hey, you're pretty athletic. Is there anything else you want to play? I was like, no, I just want to kick. I obviously knew I was scared of failing at something else because I just didn't know what to do. So I was one of those guys as a freshman that played in something called the fifth quarter. It's when they create like 35 plays for guys like me who just aren't supposed to be playing football. And I actually, I asked what I wanted to play, and I'm like 165 pounds as a freshman. And I'm like, I want to be a pass rusher, not even knowing what that meant, just something my Uncle Mo told me I wanted to be, which meant defensive end. So he puts me at the edge of the line and goes, run and get that quarterback. And I sacked a quarterback my first play in. And number one, the celebration I had around me, where this whole community of my teammates just came and smacked me on the heads, and the coach celebrating me, is when my addiction began. So like, I have to be a part of the team, and I have to start doing really scary things all the time. And that started literally my freshman year in the fifth quarter, thanks to Coach Ivankovich. I got my first stick mark. I got my first pound from my teammates. I kind of became a guy because I just had done something that I was terrified of doing. And that's where sport had really started to place itself on, oh, wow, like this might be my thing. Like this might be my belonging tool.
Yeah, I cover sports, as you know, for a living, and I see that played over so many times, the power of sports to heal and bring people together and educate. And first of all, I want to say to everybody who's listening to us, I can see this little chat box. So we're supposed to save questions to the end, but if you want to fire up some questions, I'd love to integrate your questions into this conversation. We're going till 6:30 Pacific time. So fire away with your questions. Don't wait for the Q&A. And if I see something I can work into our conversation, I would like to be able to do that. You played football for Fresno State. That's a big deal. I mean, that school produced, the number one pick in the NFL draft several years ago, and David Carr. What was that experience like for you? And how close did you come to realizing perhaps your dream of playing in the NFL? And how much was that kind of your lodestar when you got to Fresno State?
Yeah, I mean, obviously any high school football player, and especially with us in our high school, for example, like what we did in our high school hadn't been done in 25 years when we won state and balled out. And we had just such a fantastic program going on. It was recognized, right? It wasn't hard to like actually have that, like, oh, maybe I could, but at that time I was just thinking college, like NFL, forget about it. But I wasn't one of those guys that got much opportunity when it even came to these 4-year institutions. Though I was the most improved player my senior year and, had the most sacks out of almost, I think, anyone in the league that year. I wasn't getting any letters. And I was really confused by this because I knew I was outperforming a ton of folks that were, but I also realized that my whole my whole brand wasn't in the in with the coaches. My parents didn't know how to work the relationships and in work academic institutions and all this, just kind of like always looking like, why am I not getting a shot anywhere? And I actually was not even trying to play college ball. I actually wanted to become a Navy SEAL. And so it was between the becoming a Navy SEAL or an Air Force Special Operations. I'd gone and met with recruiters about this. I started wearing an Air Force shirt to school all the time. I started wearing an Army shirt. I started wearing a Navy shirt, just kind of get myself in my own headspace of like, look, put it out there so then you're held accountable to having to do it. When Mike Darr, one of the most, brilliant defensive minds in junior college football, had reached out and said, hey, I hear you want to go to the military. And I said, yeah. He said, well, what about football? I said, oh, no, it's kind of not for me. He said, well, what do you mean it's not for you? He said, you're a Division I football player. People just don't know you yet. And I'll never forget that, man. I was in the apartment, or our families at that time, and I was sitting in my parents' restroom actually taking this call because it was the only quiet room in the little apartment we lived in. And he said, what would it take to get you to just come meet with me and Ed Hall? And Ed Hall is a legend in the Bay Area, like absolute legend, linebacker coach out of Cal, just brilliant older man who just became my PhD. And when I went to visit them at this junior college, visit in Las Madonnas in Pittsburgh, they almost like really try to treat it like a foreign institution. We got picked up from our cars on a golf cart and kind of taken around this like super funny, small junior college campus, but we really started to feel ourselves, me and a couple of my buddies. And I don't know, man, I trusted him because he said something to me not many had, which was, I believe in you. And that's all I really needed to hear from Coach Darr and Coach Hall. And I went out there, and I think my game and my IQ just went out of control. And when it did, I got to play a whole season for him there. That spring, I became a player that a lot of four-year institutions were actually looking at. And Fresno State was one of them. And at that time, as you know, Fresno State was ranked one of the top 10, top 15 schools in the nation. Right. And Pat Hill was just a man I wanted to play for. And it was only 2.5 hours from home. And I'd never been away from home. So that's how I took that deal. And I went down to Fresno State. And one of my best friends, David Tollefson, who we write about in the book, had taken a year off of school and football and everything and drove me down to my recruit meeting. And was just stuffing me with protein bars and gallons of oil. Like, you got to weigh as much as you can for this meeting. And Coach Hall made me wear a suit. And then I actually put like an inch lift in my shoes too. So I was like 6'2" when I showed up. So Pat Hill sees me, goes, "You're a big boy." I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, we like to hit here. And you look like you like to hit too. And we'd really love to tell you about our pro. And he tried to get into his pitch. And I put my hand up. I said, "Coach, I'm not going anywhere. I want to sign right here, right now." So right there, without even doing a proper visit and walking around and being pitched nothing, I signed right there on the spot and ended up playing for one of the best programs in the nation. And playing in that program and being there and competing against some of the most amazing talent of our generation, National Football League, I 100% believed I could play in the league. But I knew I wouldn't be a guy that plays in the league by being drafted. I'd be one of those guys that have to show up to a pro day and show I'm athletically capable. And that's kind of what I prepared for until things took a little turn.
All right, so we have a finite window of time here, so I want to spin the narrative ahead because I want to make sure we talk about your time in Afghanistan. So to bring I'll be the narrator spinning things forward. Tareq had a bad back injury, which basically derailed his plans to try to make a go at a professional career. At the same time, his father had returned to their native Afghanistan to try to sort out some very complicated financial issues. He had owned a lot of land and his deeds were being taken from him, some by his own family, and just kind of a mess of things. And Tareq, being Tareq, decided to go to Afghanistan, actually called his dad only when he had gotten to Dubai for his connecting flight, went to go to Afghanistan thinking he'd only be there for a short period of time, ended up staying about 2.5 years off and on, some trips back home, but pretty much in Afghanistan. And besides taking care of his dad and helping his father iron out his situation, Tareq looked at Afghanistan and where so many people see devastation and tragedy and ruin and despair, And of course, he saw all those things, but Tareq being Tareq, what he most saw was potential and hope. In fact, the greater the despair, the greater the potential for hope. And so he came up with I think what can be described as a very disruptive idea for Afghanistan. Tareq, what was the idea? Why did you come up with it? And make sure that you tell the story quickly enough to get to the important meeting that you had with a Taliban warlord to try to make your idea a reality. What was the idea? Why'd you have it? And how did you have that meeting?
Well, look, I was having a really hard time convincing people that Afghanistan was evolving, and Afghanistan was seeking change. Anytime I would present or share that with any of my very capable friends who could have launched ventures there or investments there, their immediate response was like, "Women are oppressed and the Taliban are in control. Just get out of here with that." I said, "It's not true. You know, I'm there. I wouldn't be there if there wasn't an opportunity for Afghanistan to become a player in the world." And you know, what I had to do was I had to create something that would change and flip the entire narrative that these massive media companies were putting out. But at the same time, I had to be extremely creative of developing something that would have no political association, or anyone would ever really understand the impact and the efficacy of something so small be so big. And my whole mission was primarily based around changing the entire social landscape of Afghanistan, for folks to really believe and know that Afghanistan was ready for true social change. So what I decided to do was, again, go back to the answer I found peace with, and I found belonging with, and I found freedom with, which was sport. And I created the Afghan Women's Boxing Federation. And I created the Afghan Boxing Federation because Afghanistan being such a male-dominated society.
Say this again, Tareq. Afghan Women's Boxing Federation.
Yes.
That's pretty disruptive.
Yes. And it's because, again, as I was mentioning, it being the most male-dominated activity known to mankind, putting it in the most male-dominated society of all time, I thought would be enough of a statement to kind of start taking off that oppression veil. And, you know, that was stimulated by a couple other programs and projects I had started in my earlier years in Afghanistan, just through soccer and wrestling and all these other things. But I was actually there for 4.5 years, Seth.
4.5, okay.
4 to 8.5. And that's why it took the period that it did in order to build this program. But obviously this program was something I was literally told on a day-to-day basis, take my American ways and leave. Like, go back to America, like this just won't work here. But the interesting thing was, it wasn't the Afghans that were telling me to go away, right? It was all these individuals from these massive organizations that are there funding efforts around empowerment. It almost seemed as if these folks didn't want me to bring any peace or stability here because business would be out. And I had no problem speaking vocally about that, because after being there for as long as I have, it gets really frustrating when such an innocent environment is consistently being taken advantage of and being held down. And I felt like that myself. And so a lot of my community did in the US. So I could totally relate to what was going on with circumstances, with things much greater than the community. So when I launched this program, or I intended to launch this program, I had to, you know, start to share this with individuals throughout the country out of just respect, to not act like, you know, I can do whatever I want here. You have to play this game a little bit, unfortunately. So I just took a list of some of the most powerful, what the Americans and the rest of the world would call warlords, I call tribal elders, and take a list of very accredited players in that space, in that arena, and have my one-on-ones with them and do something that's been completely underutilized when it comes to any sort of development or relationship establishment, is the power of just communication. And I wanted to prove how powerful intentions and communication could be. And I did that. I built a lot of my confidence primarily talking to these tribal elders who were supposed to behead me and skin me and blow up our family's school and all these different types of things we did, to where every single one of them became the biggest ambassadors and supporters of this program. And the toughest one of this in my head was when I was told that there's great, it's fantastic you have all these individuals, but why did you go talk to these people first? I said, I needed to build my confidence. They said, for what? I said, I need to get the Taliban to support this. I need them to just promise me they're not going to stand in the way of any of this or threaten anybody involved in this program. Because there were calls coming to the girls and to me all the time with all these different types of threats, claiming it's this establishment. And I finally had an opportunity to meet with Mohammed Mutawakil, especially right after his return from Guantanamo. he was on house arrest outside of Kabul in an area called Khushalmen, about 20 minutes outside. And we had connected through mutual contacts. And I said, I'd love to come to talk to you about an idea I have, and I'd love to have your perspective on it. And that's when I went and sat down and I laid it all out on what the intention was, why this was important, how important this was for the future of not just Afghanistan, but any Islamic Republic, and also women, because there was no boxing for women in the Olympics at this time either. And to tell you, I was shocked or surprised is a super understatement. And I thought it would take many, many meals together and gifts together and all this type of schmoozing I thought I'd have to do to get an endorsement. We had a 3-hour hang up, but 45 minutes in, he became the biggest supporter of my program and assured me that the Taliban would be the front line of security for this initiative and how important it was to do this.
So how did the execution part of it go?
Sorry?
How did the program go when you actually put it in place? You got this approval and you move forward with it. How did it go? What was it like? What were the girls like?
Yeah, it was fantastic because obviously everybody was on edge knowing I was going to do this. And one of the players I had spoken to prior to in my confidence buildup phase was Anwar Jakdalik, who was the president of the Olympic Federation. And he obviously gave me, massive, massive open arms because I came to Afghanistan not having to at my age and my youth. And I didn't take a job. I wasn't contracting. I wasn't, taking any bricks. I was following my mom's rule of like, our family only lays bricks. So they knew my intentions were really about service. So I got this open arm treatment and they were all on standby to see how far I would take it. How much conviction do I really have to this perspective? And, I bolted back to the Olympic Stadium right away and shared the news with a very, very sweet lady named Mrs. Shazia, who ran women's sports federations. And her and the girls were all standing outside the Olympic Stadium when I bolted back to make the announcement that like, they're not going to be on our way. So these threats that we're getting from people, these are all just bogus, jealous people internally. It's not them. And the program actually activated immediately with about six to eight girls who were part of the movement, who I knew a majority of them from a soccer program previously. And then it turned into a national program. It turned into a national program operating in 34 provinces. We built a national team and we're en route for our presentation in the 2012 Olympics. And our young girl boxer who actually made way to the Olympics got pulled out while being in London. But it made noise. And the beautiful thing about this program was I didn't have an intention of trying to create any boxers or any world champions. The intention of this program was primarily about proving that women were ready for male-dominated roles in society. So this program has actually literally become more of a certificate that like, look, I'm a boxer, therefore I belong in parliament. I'm a boxer, I belong in the Ministry of Interior. I'm a boxer, I belong in the military. So that was the intention and the goal of this program.
Mm-hmm. Let's spin this narrative forward again. I want to we're starting to get a couple of questions in our chat box. So I want to invite people to keep asking your questions and we'll circle back before we're done. After you return home, you start building this business, different facets of your business. There's so many that I always learn more things that you're doing because there's something new every day. But basically, you had this set of athletes that you were training, particularly in the MMA, mixed martial arts world, which you were somewhat of a competitor. But at a certain point, you pivoted to coaching and you worked with a guy named Jake Shields, who became a world champion and one of your best friends and one of the teammates in our book. If you could explain a little bit how this whole notion of conquering the disease of fear applies to this world, because we think of these warriors as fearless, painless, and then we chose a different theme for each chapter. And the chapter where we wrote about Jake, the title is Humility. And again, so humility and having fear are not things that we associate with MMA fighters. Tell us a little bit about Jake and how the notion of conquering the disease of fear applies to that world.
Well, as you know, in parallel to my time in Afghanistan, I had to fund myself, but I also had to create some sort of relevance as a brand, right? So between Afghanistan, during my time in Afghanistan, from 2004 to 2008 and a half, I was back and forth between here in the U.S. quite a bit for training camps, right? when I had gotten done, obviously with football, I'd always been competing in martial arts. So I kind of leveraged that entire world. And Jake was obviously one of my teammates and friends from way back, when we decided to actually pursue a title run together, a multi-title run together. And my job was coach, his job was to fight. And, conquering the disease of fear, again, we all define fear differently. And I think that's something we have to be very, very, very clear about, right? There isn't one description of fear. And then if you don't live along, amongst this definition, then there's no fear, right? Or no insecurities, or no whatever it may be. With Jake, why I dedicated the chapter of humility to him was because of Jake's capability, capacity, and brand as one of the most renowned mixed martial artists of our time. 20-year career, 7 world championships, 6-time world champion. To this day, he still doesn't have a problem being a student. You see, like, he's the type of guy that could easily walk around in a fur coat and like just do this to you, and it's just expected, because that's what a guy like him is supposed to do, right? But he's one of the very few that'll walk into a seminar in a white belt. Him is a multi-degree black belt. A white belt will share an idea or a concept, and he'll sit down Indian style in front of that individual and sit there as a student, because he believes that everybody has a perspective and a definition of how they get to something. Not all have, not that he has all the answers for this thing. So it's a series of activities like that with Jake was one. 2 was, I had zero idea on how to coach. Zero. I've never coached in my life before I coached Jake, other than my girls' boxing program, but that wasn't a world champion fighter, right? But there was this understanding, this philosophical understanding of something much bigger than what people see, right? Like, our goal wasn't the title. It wasn't just a belt. The belt is awesome, but there's something much deeper than that. And I think that philosophical understanding we had, and that alignment of our values, is what really helped us become the team that we became. And the fact that we had no problem being each other's students, and no problem being vulnerable, and zero issue asking for help. And I think that transparency and that honesty of those values kind of overrode a lot of assumption or judgment that would usually prevent someone like me having an opportunity like that, right? For example, me having zero experience in any coaching, but knowing I can take him somewhere else mentally and emotionally that he's never gone before. The coaching part of it, like the physical coaching part of it, was like, we'll figure it out. And we really did. We went through everything you could possibly think of to try to figure out how to coach one another for fights, but we ended up getting there.
And this is such a theme in your life, your work, in the book, this connection between physical activity and mental health. When you bring in a new client, teammate, whatever you want to call it, they come to your business was called Empower. You worked with the San Francisco 49ers, executives, people, regular folks, not just, and also world-class athletes like Marshawn Lynch, who I want to talk to, but this connection that you try to establish between emotion and mental and health and physical health. And that all comes together in what you call a game plan, which is the first thing you do with a client when they come to see you. What is a game plan, and how do you establish that connection between mental and physical health?
Yeah, so a game plan, obviously because of my background and what I've done, people immediately assume a game plan will talk about like your physical goals, right? They think about a sprint time, they think about, pushing weight, they think about, physique or nutrition. I call it a game plan on purpose for a reason, because if I call it what it really is, I think I lose a lot of people. And it's just a branded term for an honest conversation. And I actually saw the value of honest conversations, because it's simple, like that just doesn't happen much anymore. And again, what I share in this book and what I'm sharing in this conversation you and I are having right now is a perspective I have that's worked for me and for my teammates, right? I don't say this is the answer to the world and to everyone's issues and problems, but it's what's worked for us. And what these game plans are, they're very, very honest conversations about really trying to identify key deficiencies, both mentally and emotionally, that are preventing you from feeling content. You see? And what happens is I always love to talk about these deficiencies, but then I also like to talk about ideals, physical ideals, because physical ideals are something almost everybody has no problem preparing for, right? Like, hey, I want to run 10 miles a day for the next 4 months, but I want to train in order to do that. But you know how painful that's going to be physically, right? You got the shin splints, the tight muscles, the hips, the psoas, the iliacus, like everything you could think of just goes bad. It's painful, like physically painful, right? But when it comes to anything associated with mental and emotional, we avoid. Like, we definitely don't want to deal with any of it. And what I like to do is I like to bring life to the correlations of physical activity, physical capabilities, and key mental and emotional deficiencies. Because think about, like, even in a very depressed state or a very anxious state or stress state, like nothing ever feels as bad as you do physically running endless amounts of sprints and then sitting in a plank position. We consistently conquer breaking through that pain point, but we never get there emotionally or mentally. But for some reason, we never connect the two, being like, look, I can actually do that because look how bad that just felt what I did on that hill. And it's kind of bringing awareness to this, especially with a lot of the athletes. Obviously, in my stable, we're individuals that are always recognized as problem childs, or people who are very misunderstood. And I don't think it's even when they would come in and they would talk to them, I'm not understood, T. It's like, well, you don't understand yourself is the issue, right? You're trying to put it on other people to figure this part out for you. Why aren't you applying what you're physically doing into some of these key mental and emotional deficiencies that are preventing you from that peace you're seeking? So these game plans really help us highlight that to a T, how you break that down. Are you aware of these things? Because the whole goal is that when you get folks aware, then you start to push something called responsibility on them. And I've seen with my game plans and case studies that a lot of folks actually choose to not be aware because they know there's an association with responsibility, right? So these game plans in the community we had formed, it actually helped normalize that and actually helped create a space that it's okay, like the creme de la creme of sport or politics or Silicon Valley all suffer from these too. And that's why I highlighted these key figures in the book, was to help kind of lower the waterline around having conversations that, folks are dealing with the same exact thing on a day-to-day basis, but we were communicating all of this through physical activity.
Along those lines, we have a question here from, I think, Marley Rabbit is her name. She writes, I love what you say about everyone experiencing fear differently. How do you help people get through the boundaries that they believe keep them safe and move them into engaging with fear? So like, I'm thinking about, it's a great question. And that word boundaries, I think, is the key, right? I think about my own workouts, believe me, when I get to the point in whatever set I'm doing and I'm feeling pain, I tend to stop. I tend to not push through. And that can be applied to so many areas of life. So how do you get people to push through boundaries that they don't want to be pushed through?
You let them make the decision, right? Because obviously you have these desires of what you want to be and how you want to feel. But it's super, super important to be mindful that there is no desire in this universe, as my dear friend Sohaib would always say to me. You can't have these desires without accepting the struggles that come with them, right? So it's what are the boundaries you set, right? Like, there's no answer I can have for you. Like, here's how you break through this boundary. You have no idea what the boundaries are that you're setting, and why are you setting them, right? Yes, I do understand through physical activity that there's pain. That's like, okay, great, don't do this because you're going to snap your ACL or blow out a disc. But then there's also pain, right? Things that we consider pain, that's strictly a decision of like, oh, it's just kind of, it's uncomfortable. I just don't want to push through this because it's pushing my heart rate more than I want it to be pushed. So it really comes down to the individual on what your desires are or where your boundaries should be. So to really be able to dive into how folks define what their boundaries are, I'd have to do a game plan and see why you're setting your boundaries at that in the first place, and then kind of work back from there.
Mm-hmm. So again, I encourage everyone for some questions. We got about 14 minutes left here. So you talked about quote unquote problem children, which frankly, I don't like that phrase, but I understand why we use it, because people understand certain things. The gentleman who wrote the foreword to this book is Marshawn Lynch. And he is kind of the classic problem child. Very interesting story as someone who grew up in a real tough neighborhood in Oakland and channeled his efforts and energies into football. to get himself out of his circumstance, but ended up going to Cal, which is a very, very high-end academic institution and really succeeding quite well in the classroom. But he came out of that experience into the NFL, but very distrusting of others, of authority figures, of people who didn't share his experiences. That distrust was well earned, but was a quote unquote problem. And when your friend Tom Cable, who was his position coach, sent him down to you, he didn't really tell you much about Marshawn. He said, "You'll know what to do." So how did you help direct? And I want to point out for everybody, when Marshawn Lynch came out of retirement a couple of years ago, he was well out of shape. Tareq Azim was the guy that he called. And so to get him back into shape, and they did it within a few weeks, and he had a great finish for the Seahawks. But how did you get Marshawn Lynch to redirect all of those emotions, which on the one hand had fueled his success to that point, but at the point that he came to you was really inhibiting him from getting to the next level?
Yeah. So look, I think with Marshawn and all of our teammates, Seth, that you've met and you've become teammates with in the last few years, I haven't done anything for them, man. Like they've done it all. What I do is just kind of stimulate a perspective, right? And just making sure there's intentions associated with actions. Because Marshawn really didn't do anything different. He just organized it, right? It was just really about fulfilling these expectations that he had for himself, and not really being able to articulate what meant what and in what order, and like what needs to be done in order to get to any of this. So majority of my role was really about just organizing the responsibilities of his heart and the responsibilities of his head, and making sure that these desires for both of these weren't trying to be fulfilled with for one another, right? I think a lot of us have really, really, really fantastic logical ideas that we think our emotions are going to get us through versus logic, right? A lot of us have these really, really cool, ways of like when we need to use our head and when we need to use our heart. And kind of what I've done with my stable, my teammates, is really tried to make them understand that like you need to use your head to do what you need to do, but you need to use your heart to get you there. And I think that's what it was. It was just really about repackaging and reorganizing desires and needs and feelings, and really being able to understand that, like, look, if anything is weighing down on the most important part of your body and your soul, which is your heart, you have to be the one that removes it, cleans it, forgive it. And I think a lot of my teammates, including myself, when we always get into that state where we feel misunderstood, it's because there's some weight on our heart that we haven't been able to forgive, and because we don't understand that we have the freedom and the power to do that, right? People think like forgiving is such a process, and with Marshawn, it wasn't. I had to make it very clear that it's simply no different than choosing to put on that shirt. It's a decision. You choose to eat the things you want to feel a certain way and get that satisfaction around something. Like it's the same thing you can do with these things sitting on your heart, because your heart's almost, I would say in a way, contaminated, because this like one experience has ruined that for almost everything else. And it was just a lot of that, man. It was just a lot of house cleaning on, not just with him, I'm talking about our whole stable, because everyone's the same. We're all seeking acceptance, and we're all preventing ourselves from this acceptance, from these fears of these unknowns. And I think when we brought light to what those two things meant, everything changed.
And again, everybody, this is the constant theme. It's that connection between the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. And it's very hard to be your best self when all four of those things are not aligned. So, Tareq doesn't have many flaws. One of them is maybe a little bit, Tareq is humble when you hear him saying, well, I didn't do anything, but I kind of think of that old metaphor, Tareq, where someone says, well, I'm not really a pearl. And I'm not really the oyster that creates the pearl, but maybe I'm that little grain of sand that irritates the oyster, and the oyster takes that and creates it to the pearl. So maybe your lot in life is to be an irritating piece of sand. And along the lines of that spiritual connection, a really good question here as we wind this down. Planet of the Apes 12 asks, in your book, you speak beautifully about God and the vanity of constantly seeking social acceptance. So God and acceptance here, Tareq. What role did faith play for you and conquering fear and acquiring self-belief. The role of faith to use God as your path towards acceptance, which is a very big word in the book, acceptance.
It played everything. It played absolutely everything. Why? So think about an individual who wants to run a marathon, right? What do they have to do every day in order to prepare for this marathon? Run, right?
Right.
Jake, for example, he's got to fight in 8 weeks. What do you think we're going to do every day to prepare for this fight? Fight. But when you ask people like myself and my teammates like Marshawn and Jed and Cabes and Chris and Tulsi and Ali and Dion and so on about almost everything and anything they want to achieve, a lot of it is hope, and I believe I can, right? How can you believe or have hope in anything if you don't practice believing and having hope in something every day? And that's where my relationship with our Creator and faith is so important to me, and why it gave so much to me is because it was like jogging every day or like lifting every day. It was a workout. Like I had to train at it in order to have that conviction and believe in things, whether it be a thought, whether it be an intention, whether it be in a friend and a teammate, a brother, a teammate, like who I'm going to give my entire life story to and with. I had to just believe that the intention of this thing was there. But why I have so much conviction with it is because I practice believing and having faith every day in something that I can't see, in something I can't hear, but only in something I can feel. And that's what I push so much is that relationship with feeling. And you can hear that in every interview I've done, and we talk about it quite a bit in this book. And that feeling is God, right? That feeling is our relationship with something greater than man. And that feeling is actually all we take to our grave. So, so much of my work is based around my relationship with our higher power.
Let's end with this in a similar way that we ended the book, because we have a great message from Tia McSherry, listening from Dubai. Hi, Dubai. Your women athletes are most welcome here to compete and meet the Emirati young women athletes in many sports. So maybe Dubai, with the Olympics coming up, wants a good women's boxing team. Tareq is the guy who can make that happen. So, but the point there is you operate in this very male world, right? Muscular guys, NFL players, MMA fighters. You were blessed at a very early age with an understanding of feminine strength. There's no strength like feminine strength. And that came from your mom. And the last chapter in this book is titled Love. And the teammate in that chapter is your mom, Mina Azim. Tell us about Mina and what she taught you about love and strength.
Well, she's the general's daughter. She's the first child of the most decorated general in the history of Afghanistan. And, one girl in that family and all brothers, all 6'4", 250-pound giants. So tough is something she is big time. But with my mom, man, my mom was a very, 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 very strict but loving woman. And I never really understood any of it when I was very young. But the older I get, the more I realize why she was, especially with me, as demanding as she was, as restrictive as she was, and disciplined me as much as she did. Because she would always tell me that you have a really important role and responsibility in this world. And I've known that since you were born, because your grandfather, who hasn't met you, named you. As my grandfather got taken away by the communists and executed, one of their last conversations was that if you ever have a son, I want his name to be Tareq, and here's why. And the here's why is what my mom was telling me my entire life. So I was always having a really hard time with how disciplined, she how much she disciplined me and restrict me from things. But it made a lot of sense to me the older I got and the more fights I got into in this world. And I'm not talking about physical altercations, but I'm talking about fights within internally with myself, around my confidence, around my consistency with insecurities, around failed relations with folks and businesses, and a lot of just really things that would make you want to quit because of the shame associated with these things. But having a mom that kind of ingrained, don't forget who you are and where you came from and what we've actually dealt with, gives me and gave me to this day the strength that no man has ever been able to give me. No coach, no teammate, no nothing. because it's so true and so honest. So I was really happy and excited on how you guided me and this book to kind of start it with my dad and end it with my mom, because that's exactly what my full circle is and was. But I just never knew how to articulate that on so much of my stimulation and desire to just go and go and go and go and go was to make up for my dad. But so much of being able to understand the responsibility that comes with that and why things happen came from my mom.
Well, it's a great way to end this. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. And you probably can tell, seeing this exchange with me and Tareq, just the bond that is created when you write a book like this. And I've said to Tareq many times, and I'll say to him again, just how proud I am of him for writing this. This is not easy to do. Everyone says, "Oh, I'd love to write a book," and I've had so many interesting experiences. But this only works if you are willing to be completely honest. There's that expression from the movie Almost Famous, where the guy said, "When you're honest and unmerciful." It's hard enough to be unmerciful with other people, but you're unmerciful with yourself, where you're really going to put these things on the page for all of the world to see. People that you know who are completely your most intimates, your family and your closest friends, who thought they knew you. Maybe you've been hiding some things or putting up a front, and then total strangers are going to read this about you. And Tareq, like everything else, just didn't hold back. So Tareq, I'm proud of you. I'm honored to be your partner and vessel in this. And I hope everybody buys the book and carries the message forward about conquering the disease of fear, connecting your mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual selves, and just having healthy relationships with the people around you, feeling good about who you are and helping others feel good about themselves. So the book is called Empower, and I hope everybody gets it and gets as much out of reading it as Tareq and I got out of writing it. And with that, Nick, we'll turn it back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you one last time to Seth and Tareq for coming out, for having such a wonderful conversation. Thank you to everybody who is in the chat, posting things, posting questions, posting comments and stuff like that. There's a number of things that landed in our running like chat thing on the side that we just didn't have time to get to. But we did see everything, and we really appreciate you all for being here. One last time, the book is Empower. You can buy it at bookpassage.com. Or you can buy it through the very first link in the description just below the video. We would so appreciate it if you do. It helps us out a lot. And although we absolutely love bringing authors to all of you here, it helps us out a lot if you do buy the book from our bookstore. But other than that, thank you very much for being here, everybody. Thank you one last time to our speakers. And thank you again. Hope to see you in the next one.
Thank you, guys, everybody.
you.